really sort of firmly in EAP and in academic skills. One of the roles that they sort of take on is as a personal tutor. I'm not sure if this is a concept that exists in every sort of university education system, but I will be given tutees who I might not teach, but I'm there for sort of pastoral support, but also academic guidance and a sort of a more of a caring role. They're quite young when they come over. It's the first time living in the UK. They're maybe 18, 19 years old. So they do tend to need quite a bit of hand-holding. Although having said that, some of our most successful students are about 16 or 17. The younger they are, actually the more effective some of them seem to be. They seem to mature quicker. But what I find is we teach study techniques, and when I say study techniques, I mean not only in terms of language learning, but I'll have somebody say, I'm struggling in economics, what should I do? I don't know, I did economics A-level 15 years ago, I didn't get a very good grade. You're probably better off asking your economics teacher. But they're kind of sitting there hanging on you, waiting for some advice, waiting on a tip. How should I learn? How should I teach? What should I teach? How should I study? What should I do? And you give advice, and sometimes you kind of question, you think, how good is that advice I'm giving? Am I giving something that actually, is getting a good sort of return on investment? Is it something that is worthwhile, them investing their time in? Or is it just me filling the time for the awkwardness when I'm sat there with them? Recently, I've seen just over a year and a half ago, a study comparing study techniques and their effectiveness. So a lot of common techniques, easily learned techniques, some commonly used, some less commonly used, some perhaps not known by teachers, let alone students. And in this study, the effectiveness of these techniques was compared. So this advice that is being given, how good are they? How useful are they? So what we're going to have a look at, for those of you not familiar with the personal tutoring system in the UK, sometimes I'm lucky. This year I've got a lovely group of personal tutees. They're very good. It's kind of which one of them is going to get the scholarship. But it's not always like that. More often than not, I sit there through things like this.
Main characters are...
No.
Did you read the book? Yes or no?
Pretty much.
What does that mean?
I skimmed it.
That doesn't count as reading. Can you name any of the other books you were supposed to read for this class?
No. I don't like to read.
So you didn't attend class and you didn't read the assigned readings and you want to know why you are failing the class?
Yes. I'm good at English and feel I should be passing. I'm doing well in all my other classes.
Please tell me there are hidden cameras around here and I am being thumbed.
That's obviously the extreme end. But there are sometimes you have students, they're sitting there and you almost think, well, how do I even begin? Where do I start? You've not done any reading, you've not turned up to class, and you're wanting a little snippet of advice that I'm going to give you, and that's it. Solve your problems, you're going to pass. And unfortunately, it does happen a bit too frequently, I would say, really. There's almost a culture of instant success. And I don't mean just in ELT. A classic example, I was in the newspaper in the UK, The Observer. There was this headline, "Fish oil helps children to concentrate." So you kind of go from a situation where, here we have Sam, take some fish oil tablets, certified genius. I feel there is this give it to me, give me the success now. The ridiculousness of this, the study of which this headline was based on, was not actually fish oil. It was omega-3 extracted from algae. So it was actually a plant-based substitute. They were not testing concentration. They were not testing exam performance. All they did was an MRI scan of the brain. But suddenly this headline is out there, and within a couple of years, sales of fish oil went from $1 billion to $2.5 billion. And I kind of think it sort of shows you how willing people would go, oh, that's interesting, that's easy, I can take some fish oil tablets, off we go. That I've never actually seen in any academic skills books, but I have seen tips like this quite a lot in study skills books or study skills websites. Drink lots of water in a week leading up to an exam so you're not dehydrated. Sounds fairly logical, sounds fairly reasonable, Hydration, dehydration, you think, okay, that would affect performance. Most of those studies are based on severe dehydration, i.e. you've done a 90-minute bike ride, and then they do your cognitive ability. Most of my students, this is not their study schedule. 7 AM, 90-minute bike ride. 8:30 go to sauna, 9:30 economics exam. It's not a like-for-like comparison, there's nothing to it. It's just, it doesn't apply. There's a study recently at a university in the north of London, and they found a vague link, but even they said there is no cause-effect link. They literally just look who's in the room, who has a bottle of water, who doesn't, what's their mark. Those with a bottle of water did better. But if you notice, I have 2 bottles of water over here. I drink them for nerves. I've finished one already. So it's not there as a cause and effect. It can be there to refocus the mind. It can be there for a break. It can be there for a stimulus. It's not, ooh, I'm a bit knackered, I'll just have a drink. I know the answer. Yeah. But it's another example of this quick fix that I think students are hoping for and hanging on to. The next part I'm going to look at now then is comparing different techniques. So I'm going to look at 9 different techniques. These are the 9 different techniques. Fortunately, a group of cognitive psychologists looked at these, it wasn't me, and they compared all of the studies out there on these different learning techniques and how effective are they, how well do these study techniques work. You should have a handout, either you have one or near you. You don't need it on your own, as long as you can kind of see one, and there's one between sort of 3 or something, you should be okay. I'm going to, in the next sort of part, I'm going to look at these different techniques and think about how effective are these techniques, how well do they work. And in terms of judging how well they work, think about these areas whilst you're looking through them. So learning conditions, I mean studying alone or studying in groups. Characteristics, I'm thinking about age, thinking about experience, knowledge, the kind of background of the student. Materials, that's thinking about, is it a maths problem or a really complex scientific paper? Criterion tasks, that's kind of how you judge them. Either on, say, memory, problem solving, or understanding. So when we look through these techniques, kind of have that in mind. So basically, along the lines of, how are they doing it, who's doing it, what are they doing, and how are we judging their performance? That kind of thing in mind. So the first 3, on the first page of your handout, you should have an overview of these 3 techniques. What I'd like you to do is just have a quick read through these techniques, and once you've had a read through, just discuss in groups which ones do you think are the most effective. Try and rank them, 1 to 3. What's the most effective learning technique from these? You have a maximum of 2 minutes. Okay. 3. Yeah. Okay, so you're not sure, you're quite happy to switch either of them? Okay, okay. Right, I'd like to say at this point before you start arguing with me, this next part is based on a literature review. Somebody else did it, it's lots of studies. Look, I am not necessarily personally endorsing this, but this is supposedly the best order. Practice testing followed by self-explanation, what I highlighted. Based on studies, not my personal opinion. So practice testing is practice testing in its broadest sense. It's kind of any of these sorts of activities you might think of here. Definition cards, key points, key words, memory triggers. Anything where essentially you're testing your memory, you're testing recall basically. So it's not sitting there with your IELTS practice test or something like that. It's any form of practicing your memory and your recall. They found when they looked at the literature review that essentially one of the reasons why it's given such high sort of status, it's effective across all kinds of materials, whether we're talking about simple maths problems or complex law papers. It works across all of them. It works across learner ages, it works on a wide range of ages, it works across different measures of outcomes. So whether that's on understanding or recall, it works on both kind of thing. And it works well on retention intervals. Some of the techniques we'll look at work really, really well if you're trying to remember it for next week. But if you're trying to remember it in 2 months, 3 months' time, you might as well not use it, really. Several of the studies have reported positive outcomes of shorter and more frequent tests, rather than longer and less frequent. And when I see some of my students and their study sort of plan, you kind of want to give them this piece of advice, because you say to them, oh, come and tell me what your plan is for next week in the revision week. 3 hours economics, 3 hours law, 4 hours math, and they're massive chunks, huge chunks, and they're kind of unrealistic expectations, and potentially not that positive in terms of the effect they will have. With Skillful, the series I worked on for Macmillan, I don't know if people heard of the Study Skills Handbook from Stella Cottrell? We've enabled to use some of the pages in that book to teach some of the academic skills, and what's quite good, because it's a multi-level sort of course, we've been given license to simplify it. So I think with some international students, the language behind this is just so inaccessible that the tips don't get through, the advice doesn't get through, because the linguistic ability is not there. But we've been able to grade them and sort of cherry pick them. So this example here is advice on revision strategies, so things like using memory triggers, working in groups, testing a partner, testing somebody else, using past exam papers, all that kind of advice. Benefits that you'll find with practice testing, it aids later retention, it identifies gaps in knowledge. So not only are you saying like, oh, I know this, it's also saying, I don't know that. You learn more from future studying. You know, it's common knowledge, it's schemata, you build on what you know. If somebody used to give me something to learn in physics, yeah, God help me. We're basing it on a very, very small foundation. There's not much I can go from. But if you have studied and you've built up a good foundation, you can add more for it quickly. And you can organise that knowledge better and transfer it to new contexts. Self-explanation. I have to say with self-explanation, I know you yourself and another group put that as the top one. The reason why they didn't put that as one of the highest ranked one is, in all honesty, because there's not actually enough research in that technique to prove it. So it's not one that's been studied as much as practice testing. Practice testing has been studied more and proven more consistently in more areas. Self-explanation, it's been shown to work with a wide range of materials and ages. It does work on the various outcomes, comprehension, transfer. It is really enhanced if you teach students that technique. Rather than expecting them to question it, if you teach them to question it, it has a really, really big impact on their performance. So it does work really, really well. One of the questions in the research is bank or buck. It can, depending on how much you're asking them to question the text, it can actually be a lot of investment for a questionably small return. Yeah, I mean, I think as you become more knowledgeable in the area, more experienced, you instantly question it. You skim through it and the questions are there like that. But if you're talking like a foundation level student who's straight out of school into university, possibly not really having to question academic claims before, they don't have that background knowledge, they don't have that technique necessarily, and so it takes a lot of sort of effort to learn it, and the return on investment is kind of, return on investment? I'm doing business presently. The return on investment is questionable. Self-explanation, one thing I do think would possibly work well as a technique there is the idea of reflective learning journals, because you can put in there, you can relate the ideas that you have from previous things that you've read. You can put questions in there about how A connects to B. You can write questions about what does this mean, how significant it is. So you can kind of sort of relate it to previous knowledge, but you can also question it and put in future research questions that you can then use later on. Highlighting, the reason highlighting is yeah, exactly, yeah. The reason highlighting is important, it's sort of included, is it's one of the most frequently reported methods that students use. The big problem is that. Where's the key point? What do I need to learn? I remember this when I was doing my own degree, and I sat there doing a group presentation. I looked over a friend's shoulder and I was like, what have you done to your work? I've highlighted things. Yeah, what? Like everything. But the issue, highlighting, is shown not really to be very effective, even when done very well. It actually doesn't actually boost performance much at all. But if students are doing it all the time, you kind of need to teach them at least how to do it better. If they're not going to abandon it, you know, they're not going to suddenly go, oh, no, I'll put that away, I'm not going to buy this pen anymore. So you do need to sort of teach them these reading strategies in a way. I know that some people question like reading strategies as a concept, but I do think it's important, especially in an academic concept, to teach them things like identifying the main idea, looking at topic sentences, identifying the author's stance. Even simply, if you're just highlighting the word however, that just signals to them, here's a different point of view. You know, here's the other argument. On the other hand, you know, and there they can then, when they come to it and try to engage on it at a higher level and think critically about it and infer what is meant, then they've actually got key points to identify where different arguments are presented. And they understand and notice the organisation and how the organisation and structure is delivering the content. Right, that's enough of me talking. Turn over, please. On the next worksheet, you have 3 more techniques. Could you have a look at the next 3 again? Rank them. 1, 2, 3. There, get 2 minutes. I think 2 minutes. Are they in the right order already? Maybe. And I will struggle to pronounce that last word.
Let's do all of these. To get to them, things that we want to. And then you have to do like why you're doing it. It's just practicing or regularity.
No, essentially Okay, so the difference between interleaved and distributed practice, distributed essentially just in terms of time. So it's just spacing it out over, essentially not cramming. Certain schools have made a fortune out of running cramming schools. It doesn't really work very well. So distributed practice is just essentially setting out across a timetable, but not ridiculous. Spend 2 days planning your study timetable and 1 day studying, but over months of practice, spreading it out. Interleaved is essentially, if you think about a normal academic textbook, the way they're divided up is they chunk it. So you do, if you're studying economics, on week 1 you study supply. On week 2 you study demand, on week 3 you study price equilibrium, something like that. So it's kind of compartmentalising it. Interleaved would be kind of crossing them over, and not sort of going, okay, I've done the past perfect, let's move on. I've done the third conditional, let's move on. So it's kind of like joining them together, connecting them, sort of thing. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you sort of think of overlaying each other. So the correct order, the supposed most effective is distributed practice, then most interleaved, the last one, keyword, distributed practice. The reason it's given such a high sort of status, it works across all kinds of ages, materials, it works with long delays, and it's fairly easy to implement. It doesn't really take a lot of effort to teach someone. It takes a lot of effort to get them to do it, but it doesn't necessarily take a lot of effort to get them to understand the concept. The difficulty is with distributed practice, textbooks don't encourage it. They rarely revisit material. And this concept of the procrastination scallop. So if you think of a scallop, it opens incredibly slowly, doesn't it? Like at the start, and then it goes boing. And that's kind of how students are when they study. Kind of like doing nothing for 6 weeks and then go, test! And suddenly they're at it, heads down. So with distributed practice, it's kind of sort of one of the sort of areas you have in the book. You have these many sort of scenarios where students are having to unpick what the students have done wrong. Why are they not performing to the best of their ability? And after sort of analysing it, they then are presented with sort of tips, giving them advice on how to do it, how to study, sort of what techniques to use, and then getting them to apply it to their own context. Interleaved practice, this is a little bit like in the previous one, where it's only given really a lower ranking than distributed practice, purely because there's not enough research to show its effectiveness. But it can have a significant effect on students' learning and retention of mathematical skills. It's been shown to do really well with. And it does help sort of other skills like memory, problem solving, recall, understanding. It doesn't hinder them. It doesn't have a negative impact really. Keyword mnemonic works well across ages, abilities and some materials. The reason why it comes out the worst off is many words don't work. Any French speakers in the room? Why have we got a picture?
Yeah.
Any idea? Bob? No idea? So you have the idea that you put an image in there, so you look at this and that will help you recall the word. So that will help you recall the French word for tooth, for example. Dentist, the French word for tooth is? Yeah. So it's kind of, but the reason it's given such a weak sort of rating, it only really works for concrete nouns. It's difficult to apply elsewhere. So you could imagine using it with a periodic table and creating some kind of mental image, or with minerals or something like that. So you could use it with concrete nouns very well, but outside of concrete nouns, it's got quite limited use. And in general, it only works well for short-term memory. It doesn't work well for long-term memory. My colleague argued with this and turned out a rhyme that she'd learned to remember back in 1952 or something. I said, yeah, but how many other things did you remember like that? She said, well, I remembered that. I was like, yeah, this one thing. So it has a limited use because it's difficult to transfer. So in a way, I think it's better to try and teach students things. If they're learning vocabulary, for example, ways of organising the vocabulary. Memory thrives on organisation, connecting one thing to another, creating hierarchies, creating concept pyramids, so that you're relating A to B. So you see how this theory of research relates to that theory of research, how Maslow's hierarchy of needs led into Herzberg's theory of motivation, and you can see the connections, you can build on those connections. Okay, last one. 3 more techniques. Put them in order. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're nearly out of time, so I need to stop quickly. This group here, your order. This is the right order? No. The order's on paper. That's the elaborative interrogation, summarisation, rereading. Elaborative interrogation is basically, it's fairly easily taught, not necessarily easily applied. It works well on a wide range of topics and learners. The difficulty is, it doesn't work well when you have a basic knowledge that you're trying to build on. So if it's the first time you've ever studied law, and it's not going to work that well because you can't relate it to other ideas. You can't question and challenge it in the same way that you could if you were on the 3rd year of your law degree. So it's kind of a more effective technique later in your sort of academic life. It's not proven for long-term memory. That's not to say that it doesn't work, but it's not proven in the research for long-term memory. For me, elaborative interrogation relates really to what you hear a lot of talks on in EAP and in TEFL in general nowadays, critical thinking. It's kind of like that idea of the questioning ideas and asking the why. So these are sort of some examples related to some of the reading and listening texts that we have in Skillful. You know, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the lower needs must be satisfied before the higher ones. Do you agree with this? Why or why not? So questioning, you know, does that concept actually work? Does it relate? Can I understand it? Does it mean something? So it's kind of questioning and challenging things. Summarization works well if you're already good at it, but it's actually incredibly difficult to train someone to summarize well. It doesn't compare well to the other techniques. It sort of falls behind on some of the other techniques. The difficulty, I think, though, if you're coming from an academic background, is summarization is not just about learning and memory. Summarization applies to their writing. They need to incorporate that in their academic essay. So it's not something I think you could ever really abandon in an academic or an EAP sort of skills course, but because it's so fundamental to things that they will be assessed on. Rereading is the reportedly most frequently used technique by students. So obviously they don't really need any training in it. But it doesn't actually compare well to the other techniques we've looked at here. It has a limited impact on recall. And I kind of remember doing it myself on some of my A-levels. And how I felt about it is is a little bit like this clip here.
Look at this. I must have read that in 2018 legislatures to citizens 50 times. I still don't know what it means. It's such a different legislatures to the right. It doesn't mean none of them do. Just squiggles on a page. Is this a word?
Yes. Council.
Is it?
I think you probably need a bit of speed. And then you go for pounding a bit.
These are from the electronics. If they exist, are good for the brain.
Think of your stomach, man.
It kind of it sort of brings back memories of just constantly reading something and thinking, go in, please, go in. I have a test on Friday. It does have a really limited impact on recall, but it's something that students are doing all the time, and they kind of need to be trained out of doing it. So I heard clapping over there, so I should summarise. High utility, practice testing, and distributed practice. They are the most proven techniques to work. The moderate utility, these actually I think are really effective techniques. It's just there's not actually really enough research out there yet to push them up to the top category. I think if you get another 5-10 years down the line and there are more studies of these techniques, they will probably be pushed up into that top category. I think they will move up. You know, things like self-explanation, adaptive interrogation, and critical thinking. I remember speaking to our politics teacher and her saying, I can ignore spelling mistakes, I can ignore poor organisation, just challenge and question everything you read. You know, and I think that's fundamental to any academic subject. Low utility are unfortunately a couple of techniques that students are using frequently, highlighting and rereading. Rereading, I don't really think you can teach anyone to do it any better. I don't think it really works. Highlighting, I think you can teach them to do it better, but it's still a pretty ineffective technique. So the examples I gave you there were taken from a new series from Macmillan called Skillful, which has been nominated for an Elton in course innovation. So hopefully we win in a couple of months' time. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.